We see amazing businesses being born all the time during recessions and chaotic times. But the question is how do you thrive if you're already in business during those chaotic times? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today with Nadya from the Reinvention Academy. And if you're a course creator, you definitely want to pay attention because this pandemic has really opened up the eyes to online education, which means your competitors are coming. So keep listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today we have an amazing episode and an episode that I think will really help you navigate 2021 because obviously 2020 has been a year of chaos and things coming up. It just seems like we're getting hit with one thing after another. So I started talking to today's guest, and as she started to talk, I just kept going, yes, 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 and agreeing with everything she was saying. And what she does and what she teaches is so relevant for every single entrepreneur today that I couldn't help but have her on the podcast. So today we have Nadya Zhexembayeva. I messed it up. I know I did. I'm so sorry.
You're very close. You're very close. Happy to be here, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And you are the founder of the Reinvention Academy. And I know where I want to take the interview, but for those people who don't know who you are or what you do, can you just give a little bit of an overview of like what you do and who you are?
Absolutely. I am a recovering academic. Just like a recovering alcoholic, you never quite leave the academia. So I still do research and write books and work in the field as a teacher. But since 2007, I own a group of companies and we focus on one thing: helping companies getting out of crisis. And this is what I do. I help companies get out of crisis, and then I teach them how to do it without me.
Okay, great. And when you say get out of crisis, what does that mean? Like, what is it? What would a crisis be?
We deal with every kind of crisis. So occasionally it's economic crisis. It can be a global or local. Occasionally it's a product specific crisis. So just a product not performing. But we also done some really crazy stuff. For example, the saddest story of our work is when the CEO of rather major company killed himself, and we got a call on what do we do next.
Gotcha. Okay. And you talk about reinvention, like obviously the name of the company is the Reinvention Academy. What exactly is reinvention? Because what I really want in this answer that you're about to give is for the listeners to really resonate. Is this something I need now? Is it something that I should be paying attention to in the future? Like, what is reinvention? And then how do you recognize if you're an entrepreneur who needs reinvention inside your company?
I think there is an important distinction we have to start with, which is Reinvention 1.0 and Reinvention 2.0. So first, Reinvention 1.0, you are living in a particular business model, in a particular segment, in a particular market, and something disrupts you. Maybe a competitor puts out a new product, or there is a COVID-19, or there is some other disruption, and you come together to reinvent your business so that you adapt and survive. That is Reinvention 1.0, which is one-time project. Let's figure out how to deal with this crisis so that we can come out alive.
Got it.
Reinvention 2.0 is building a system that does this in a preventative way, so that you are not constantly chasing your tail and firefighting, but you are reinventing ahead of the disruption curve. You're noticing trends before they come, and then you turn risks into opportunities.
Okay, gotcha. And a lot of our listeners are course creators and different things like that. And it seems like it's been a mix, at least from my experience, a mix of people who, with COVID and everything, some people have done extremely well. And then some people got hit really hard because their audience is someone who got hit really hard. If you're the first type of business owner or course creator who actually did really well, is there any type of reinvention that we should be considering? Because although it's a change in the positive way, are there things that they really need to be focusing on at all?
If you are one of those lucky ones, and I have to say, because of the nature of our online courses, we have done very well because this is what people really need right now.
Yeah.
If you're the lucky one, then this is the time to go beyond one-time success and turn it into a system. So can you build a way for you to reinvent on a regular basis? It starts with very simple things. How often do I need to stop with my team and ask ourselves what no longer serves us? And what can we do ahead of the curve? So not fixing things when they're already broken, but imagining new things before they're even right here and right now. So this is for the first group. The second group, this is the perfect time. You have no more excuses, and I don't mean it in a sad way. I've gone through many crises myself, lost a lot of money in 2008 crisis. So that was a very honest time for me to tell myself all those things I wanted to wait and see, all the times I told myself I'll get to it later. Now the time when we're bare naked and we're suffering, to let go of things that no longer serve us and really focus on things that are working, even if they're not working perfectly, but working a little bit. This is the time to amplify those particular things that are working.
Gotcha. Does that seem like a very hard thing for people to do sometimes? Is like it seems like a very logical thing where you might go into or start working with a company or like a CEO or someone, and you help them recognize here are the things that are not working, but it's something that they've done for a really long time. Do you find it really hard for them to let go in those moments?
First, yes. And when you are resisting change, if you're the person who is like, oh no, I cannot kill this particular product, or I cannot let go of this process, or I cannot really depart from this market, first and foremost, from the point of view of science, I want you to know that you are completely normal. Resistance is a normal biological reaction to change. This is a flight or fight syndrome, waking up on you much faster than your brain can catch up. So you are normal in your resistance, and you are normal in feeling this moment of, I cannot do it.
Right.
Good news, however, at the level of our bodies, this reaction to any kind of disruption is very short lived. So, at the body level, you are a victim of that reaction only the first 90 seconds. From the moment your adrenaline hits your bloodstream and your heart starts pumping and your body gets hot so you can fight this threat that is threatening your business, to the moment it's clearing up through your kidneys, on average, is about 90 seconds. So, that's the time you have no choice.
Right.
But after the 19 seconds, this is a mindset shift. This is the important work you do with really rethinking and turning around some of the assumptions that we're holding in our head. And this is the time to get out of the prison of our old assumptions and build some new ones.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess it seems sometimes is easier said than done, like, and as I was going through your book, you have examples of a lot of businesses that really held on to the things that didn't work just because that's the way it has always been. And that's actually one of the things, because we've worked with you on your messaging and stuff, but that one of the things we stand for is not doing something just because that's the way it's always been done. Would you say that's the number one killer of businesses, is just always staying there and doing what you've done because it's always what you've done?
Absolutely. So since you are already familiar with this recent book, the name we gave to this particular phenomenon is Titanic syndrome. This attachment we have to the past. And the sad story, when you go through the actual historical documents on Titanic, what was going on through building of Titanic and then through the first part of the voyage and then closer to the disaster and during the disaster, it's shocking, story after story that shows this exceptional attachment to the status quo, to the past success, and also tacit or very obvious arrogance, this idea that I've done this already, I know what I'm doing. And when I say that, I truly don't mean that one of us is better than another. I suffer from Titanic syndrome. I'm the first one to say I suffer from it, right? So I sit in a team meeting and some of my youngsters are saying, that smells like Titanic syndrome right now. You are telling us that you know it all. That smells like Titanic syndrome. So we all suffer from it. It's natural to be attached to our past success, to our past ways of doing business. And today, in the speed of change we're living in today, this might be exactly what kills you. And that's the difficult part of building a system that works against our nature, this attachment to the past.
I love that. And there was a quote in your book. I wish I would have wrote down the person's name, but the quote was, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence isn't the turbulence, but to operate with yesterday's logic." And
Yes, that's a classic.
It's who?
It's a classic by Peter Drucker.
Oh yeah. And I read that and I was like, wow, that's so true. So that's one of the things we talk about on the podcast all the time is just your experiences and the stuff usually forms the lens in which you see the world or you see your business. But that lens always has to be changing because today, like you just said, today's market and environment and society has never been changing faster in history. So if we're not constantly looking to adapt and to change, well, we're eventually going to get left behind. And my next question to you is, if we find ourselves in that Titanic syndrome, we find ourselves where business is either plateaued or it's going down, or we're in the middle of like a crisis or chaos, what are the steps in order to rebuild back out of that? Like, what's the first thing that someone should be doing and looking at?
First thing is stop the bleeding. And that's a tough issue because when we are bleeding cash, time, resources, we want to believe that the moment of survival is just around the corner. And the reality is it's almost never is. Mm-hmm. So the first tough decision to say, okay, where am I bleeding money, time, and resources, and how can I stop that? Second, concentrate on what's working even in the middle of crisis. So let's say your sales are down by, 40%. And you go through the week and you know that on average you're down 40%, or you go through the month and you know on average each week you're down 40%. But there's one day where you are only down 20%. Now stop and analyze every moment that was a little bit better than others. All of them with the in-depth analysis of what are you doing right in those moments that makes them a little bit better. And how can you do a little bit more of that? I think many times we think about change and reinvention as this radical stuff. The reality is most of it is in 1% steps. If you can improve 1% today and then improve 1% tomorrow and then 1% more day after tomorrow, by Monday you will be 5% better. That's a huge improvement. So low hanging fruit, easy analysis of what's working even in the middle of crisis. But before anything, stop the bleeding.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And how would someone, I would imagine that it's pretty obvious in most people's businesses when it's like, okay, we need to change something. But I would imagine there might be some businesses where it isn't so obvious. So what, do you have any like big indicators for the listeners to recognize like, hey, maybe it's time to wake up and change some things inside the business? Is it just like a loss of revenue? Is it a loss of team members? Like, what are kind of those signals?
I have some bad news for you and for the listeners. As a researcher, when I learned this, I was like, we're in trouble. So there's excellent study done by a group of scientists and then written up in a great book, not a super new book, but a great book called Stall Points, that discovered that, of course, we all know that every business, every product, every career goes through a life cycle. And there is the upper side of the life cycle when we're growing in our performance. And then there's a left or the other side of a life cycle when we're kind of losing it, we're maybe losing money, or physically as a person, we're losing strength. Normal life cycle, we come to the peak and then we go into the decline. Mm-hmm. So what these researchers discovered, and this was a shocking number to me, when we start reinventing on the decline, when we start reinventing at the time where our sales are already showing signs of decline, or our net profit or any other indicator shows the sign of a decline, chances of us ever reaching back to our peak historical performance is only 10%.
Whoa.
Only 10%, which means if we want to have longevity in business, if we want to have sustainability, we need to start reinventing on the growth part of the cycle before we reach the peak. Because at the time of decline, the finances are already tight, the
Yep.
emotions are running crazy. Nobody wants to make a difficult decision. We are in a free fall. So we have to start a new life cycle before we reach the peak. And this is the biggest thought reversal using your language that
Yeah.
we all have to do. This is like, oh my God, I come to my team and I say, guys, I know we haven't yet reached the peak, but it's time to reinvent. And the team is like, are you freaking crazy? What are you asking? Right? So
Yeah.
this is the thought reversal. We have to learn how to reinvent on the growth side of the cycle, which brings us to immediate dilemma. How do we know we're reaching the peak?
Yeah.
Because if you do it too late, you're cooked by your competition. But if you do it too early, remember Apple had a version of a tablet in the 90s,
Yeah.
but nobody around them was ready. So they just lost tons of money. If you do too early, you will kill yourself. But if you go too late, somebody else will kill you. So how do I
Mm.
choose? For that, the best thing is to be very, very mindful to the studies and the data in your own industry. So what I recommend, you and your team just sit down. If you work, if you're a solopreneur, sit with your friends or your family members and try to map out the reinvention cycles you went through in the last 10, 15 years. You will see a pattern. Some industries reinvent very often, telecom, high tech, internet based businesses, every year or less. And then there are some businesses that reinvent relatively slowly. But today, the average number that we have closed the study on September 2020, to survive and thrive in 2020, you reinvent every 3 years or less.
Mm.
So know your number, know that it's approaching, and start investing into new cycle while you're still in the growth and you have resources, emotional, financial, organizational, intellectual, to do so.
Gotcha. Okay, so two questions. What
Yeah.
is there a company that's a great example of someone who keeps reinventing on the way up? Like, would Amazon be a perfect example of that?
Amazon is absolutely a perfect example. A different one would be in the one that you might touch or not know that you touch is a European company, Philips. If
Mm.
you remember Philips in the 90s, early 2000s, their number one product was a TV, but they couldn't figure out consumer marketing. So they would always have a great quality of image, one of the best on the market, but their consumer marketing was bad because the consumers used to think that it's Sony that is much better quality. So they went into electronics of different kind, and then they asked themselves, okay, which industry needs what we know? Which industry needs what we can do, which is quality of image, but does not need what we cannot do, which is consumer marketing. And that's why Philips right now makes most of its money in medical equipment, because to catch a cancer at the level of micromilliliter, millimeter, not
Hmm.
milliliter,
Yep.
millimeter, you need definitely not measuring that in liters. But when you are it's Thanksgiving talking right here, when you are trying to catch in quality of image at the level of tiny, tiny dot, you need quality of image, but you will never advertise an MRI machine or CAT scan to an end consumer. So this was a perfect fit for them. And they keep reinventing. They're now going into software and so on. Amazon, absolutely. But there are also companies that we see all around us. Some of the best grocery stores right here in US have reinvented continuously. Some of the kind of less interesting companies that produce equipment for us reinvent continuously. It's finding a new point of growth, new trigger points, new cycle before you're reaching that peak, before you are entering into decline.
Gotcha. Okay. And so that like new thing that you're talking about, that could, if I understand correctly, could be a product, a service, or even just a marketing angle or something along those lines, correct?
Absolutely. Most of the time, the mistake we are noticing among our clients and our students is they think that reinvention is all about innovation and technical and technological breakthrough.
Mm.
That couldn't be further from the truth, even in a highly technological industries. One of my dear friends is Toksiliak, who is the CEO of a major automotive parts company. He did his PhD across all automotive industry and discovered that no more than 30% of automotive success is right now due to technical and technological innovation.
Mm.
Actually, it's all mainly around other things like your business model, your partnerships, your payment methods, your processes, your positioning, your branding, your communications. And in the book, we give you this very simple tool called 15 Ways to Reinvent. It's a kind of compass to find which of the 15 directions you might use, which includes customer experience and includes your network and distribution, includes your culture and mindset, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of freedom what to reinvent, and you do not need to worry that it's all about product or technological kind of breakthroughs.
Gotcha. Okay. And I'm going to ask a question for personal reasons, because this is kind of what we're going through right now. But I think it would help even keep things related to the course and service industry, because that's what we're in right now. Like, our biggest marketing angle for the last 2 years has been all about how-to content. It's like, we don't want to do endless amounts of how-to content. That's not what we want to do, because that's what's been preached for so long.
Yeah.
But I'm starting 2 years ago, no one was talking about that. Mm-hmm. I started to notice more and more people are now talking about it. So I'm now looking for different angles and ways to, I guess, reinvent that major overall theme. I'm assuming that would be a form of reinvention inside of our company, correct? Even though we doubled revenue from last year, it feels like it's time for like a reinvention for us. Is that like an accurate way to kind of describe it?
Absolutely. So at this point in our history, intellectual property is very, very short-lived. What you invented and what you came up with, it might be a totally new idea, or it was a genius way to connect old ideas, which is what we do as well. Our tools, we have some new tools, but mostly what's new is connecting different school of thoughts. Strategy usually hates innovation. Innovation is not a friend with design thinking. Scrum Agile lives in their own world. So we connect different instruments and school of thought. Now, this is very, very short-lived advantage because of the speed of change, because of the whole world being open and every piece of information available at your fingertips. You will always have somebody taking your ideas, and at this point, the effort to protect it is almost futile. So the real competitive advantage comes with moving ahead. So by the time they catch up with you, you're already on the next big thing and the next big thing and the next big thing. Because you are in the field of intellectual property, you're creating new concept, new intellectual property. Because of that, it's especially short-lived because it's easier to creatively borrow. I don't want to call steal, but it's easier to borrow and build on rather than, let's say, if you invented an engine.
Right.
It's fewer people can steal engine as an invention than to steal intellectual property. So, and I don't mean, it's not a judgment call. There's a wonderful book called Steal Like an Artist. Most of us borrow and build on each other's idea, and there's nothing with it. It is about understanding that you have to move faster than people catching up with you. Because of course, if your stuff works, they will start borrowing and expanding and other stuff.
I mean, I think that it's very rare to find such an original thought nowadays anyways. And I always feel like people are taking something and building on and tweaking and stuff. And it's just the way it is. It's how we advance, and create better things. So that makes a lot of sense. My other question was like on the flip side of that, with 2020 being such a roller coaster year, I mean, they're overnight or within a month's time, some businesses like were doing fine. They may have been reinventing, but because of external circumstances, they now find themselves on a very fast decline. And like you said, only 10% end up coming out of that, which is really scary because it means 90% don't. What do they start doing when there's that decline? Like, these things are outside of their realm of control. I mean, how do you reinvent in that kind of scenario?
We have a very simple exercise that I suggest everyone does. And some people who are comfortable with the word fear, we use it as a fear to action exercise. Those companies who feel like they really don't have anything to fear, we call it risk to action exercise, but the essence is the same. We all have fears on what might happen. We're losing clients, we're losing partners. We don't know how long it will last. We don't know, should we turn right or left, what to invest in, because things are moving so hard. So the exercise has 3 steps. You can do it on a napkin, and it takes very little time, and it's a great thing to do with your team. Step number 1, list all your fears. And when you list them, make sure you put it into columns. The fear itself, and the second side of the column is what will happen if this fear realizes, if this risk actually realizes. So what is the actual consequence that we are afraid of? This step will help you notice that you actually have less fears than you think, because when you look at the consequences, it's usually 2 or 3 of the same things. That's what you're really afraid of, not the triggers that are driving. Second step, look at everything you've written and sort it into 3 buckets. Things you can control, things you can influence, and things that are outside of your control.
Okay.
And the third step is to create an action plan around the first 2 buckets and ignore completely the last bucket of no control. Because the moment you spend time in the place which you have no control, you are not only wasting your energy, you are quite literally wasting your resource. You need to understand what happens with your body when you're outside of your control. Your body literally shuts down. So the fight or flight syndrome works the following way. The stress hormone, you are out of control. Like COVID-19, I'm out of control. I cannot control the fact that I'm not allowed to open my restaurant. That's it. I'm out of control. What happens to my body? Your body is pumping blood into its muscles because it's learning through history of thousands of years that when you have a threat, you have 2 options: kill that thing or run away from that thing. If you're strong enough, kill it. If you're not strong enough, run away. I'll pretend to be dead, which is another form of run away. So your body is taking away your blood. And the first place where it takes away your blood is your mind. Your vessels literally shrink so that the blood is extracted into your muscles. Second thing that happens is called auditory exclusion. This means you cannot hear new ideas. You literally lose part of your hearing because you are preparing to fight or flight. Third thing that happens, you are not able to see on the periphery. Your mind stops recording part of your sight. So you cannot think, you cannot hear, and you cannot see. And in the moment of crisis, this is what you actually need, because the answer will never be straight in front of you. It always will be on the periphery. It always will be something unusual. You always will need to twist and turn and find a new combination. So this is the time to stop, to force yourself to stop going into that third bucket, which is, oh my God, when it's going to be over. And then for 2 hours, that's the only thing we discuss in a meeting, even though we have zero control over the situation. So these are the 3 simple steps. And we have somewhere a worksheet. Let's see if I can send it to you and you can use it for the 3 steps. Right in the middle of the COVID shutdown, we held a philanthropical or free summit to help people with simple tools that were really in a difficult situation. And we put a little worksheet for that as well. But you can do it on a napkin. You don't need a fancy worksheet for that.
Yeah. I mean, I would love that worksheet. If you can find it and send it over, we'll link to it or whatever on the website. And that's so interesting because it's just those things you don't really think of. Like, you don't really realize, and sometimes you're just not aware of where your mind is, where your energy is, where your problem solving is going. And if it is on those things that you can't control, then it's just wasted time, money, revenue, energy, all of that stuff. So, I mean, I love that. And I would assume too, in those moments, I would imagine there's probably still things going okay for people and there's still things to be testing. And there's a student that that kind of comes into mind where her clientele basically had to close all of their doors. So they didn't have any money. And so the byproduct means that her launches weren't going very well on her courses because they didn't have any money. But she did a launch, she broke even. And then she did an offer for a higher end mastermind, which almost didn't make any sense. It was like, they're not buying the lower program. Why are you telling me to offer this higher one at a $5,000 price point? And she did. And 3 people bought. She made like $15,000. So in that moment, I'm assuming that would be like a sign of something to maybe lean into, explore and pivot. Is that like a correct assumption?
Oh, absolutely. So we often think about reinvention as a question of what do we change? What do we change in our product or in our marketing or in our branding or in our processes? Much more interesting question is what do we keep?
Mm,
Because the ebb and flow of life goes very fast. You are on the peak, then you collapse, and then you're in the peak in a very short period of time, every 3 years or less, looking at the statistics, which means if you're going through the crisis right now, it's not only what you do right now, but also how do you prepare for the time that will be coming out of crisis and how do you prepare for the next crisis. So I can say for ourselves, we stopped all launches right in the middle of the closure,
mhm.
and we created tons of free support for people. We had the luxury to give a little bit of time and support and pay the team and do everything for free.
Right.
But just on one event that we offered for free, we generated 3,200 leads.
Wow.
Uh, Very highly qualified, happy leads. And they started asking us, can you offer us something new? And we
Mm,
actually had our biggest month in May because of that. But February, March, and April, we said no selling, just serving. Just serve. You have a luxury to do that. So serve now. That is your way to build connection, to build trust, to build whatever else. In other times in our business, we knew that we actually need to close down and reduce some of our spendings if we can, probably not touching the team, but whenever, if realistically we cannot support the team, we also need to be very honest with the team. So shutting down was another option in another time, but you can adjust quite a lot of things in the middle of a crisis. And the most important thing to remember, crisis comes and goes. You will have life after this, and the way you show up during the crisis will define a lot of things after the crisis.
yeah. I love that. And I go back to that quote too, because I remember you and I were kind of talking before on one of the calls that we had. And one of the things I had mentioned, which I think you agreed to, was that what's going on now is not really that unique because, like you said, there's always going to be a crisis and there's always something, right? There's always going to be like an economy crash, or there's always going to be something. It's just the way in which things happen is a little bit different, but we're going to continue to go through a lot of different things that we're going through right now. And it really comes down to like how you're looking at it, where you're focusing your time, your energy, and all of those things. My question, go ahead.
I'm with you completely. There's absolutely no evidence that we will slow down or that the amount of disruption will go less. This is our century. The century of disruption is here. There is some ideas that maybe at the end of a century we will start slowing down again, but there is very little evidence that it will happen in the next few decades, which means stop thinking of crisis as something new, as something surprising, as something, oh my God, this is happening. For example, I always ask this question: how many economic crises do you think happened since 1988? Which you have an answer in front of you because you have the book in front of you. So since 1988, and most people are like 10, 5, 15.
Yeah.
If we just look at one type of crisis, with it, which is a country level crisis, so crisis at the level of one country, we had 469 country recessions since 1988.
Whoa.
And 69. That's one recession every 25 days. So if you
Wow.
think that recession is some big news that we should all be adapting to from the scratch, no, we should have a plan. We should know that crisis is coming. We should know exactly how we're going to live in crisis and how we're going to live in good times, and start treating crisis the way we look at, I don't know, something normal. So I don't know which part of the world you guys who are listening are living through. I'm in Ohio. It's snowing. It's not a big deal. It snows every year. There's no need to make it into a big event. You should know how to drive in snow. You should have winter tires. You should know, you should have puffers. You should have equipment to clean the roads. It should not be a big new deal. And that's the way it's time for us as entrepreneurs to start looking at crisis.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's a normal part of business. It's a normal part of life. And the ones that always seem to navigate it are the ones that are cool, collected, can put their thoughts together, and having a process like what you have obviously helps a ton. My question to you is, how did you learn all of this stuff? Like, is this your first business? Did you have to go through some like falls in business to learn all of this stuff? Like, what's the story behind it?
Well, on the business side, yes. I had everything from lost money to $500,000 stolen by a friend and everything
Whoa.
else you can imagine. But I think what started all of this is actually a personal story, which I think is always the case. I think your
Yeah.
biggest passions in life are always started by a personal story. So my own relationship with change happened long before I was born, and I really didn't know it until I was much older, because my country, the Soviet Union, was very, very dangerous to speak up against the government. So you would not tell the story to your child, because the child can accidentally say it in a kindergarten, in a school, and so on. So when I was young, I didn't know why my parents were preparing me for crisis, but I learned much later. So most of my family members, up until my grandfather, who killed himself in the 70s, everyone was either executed or imprisoned, or
Wow.
imprisoned and then executed. If you think about the period between late 1920s to early 30s, which is less than 100 years ago, 40% of Kazakhstan population was killed, murdered on purpose by the authorities so that they can control the population.
Jeez.
So most of the country had to learn to live in crisis quite painfully. And when I was growing up, my parents were very much clear that my assumptions about stability should not control my life, that the world will not be stable, there will be massive disruptions, and we should be ready whatever is happening. And then I grew up and Soviet Union collapsed. So imagine you have a country and it happened without any warning, no voting, no discussions of any kind. It was a normal August, and we were not warned that anything was about to happen. And three people who were presidents of three republics, so Soviet Union is 15 republics, imagine like 50 states.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine three states, let's say Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, got together, signed a document, and dissolved the United States. This is what happened to us. Nobody else knew. Nobody else was prepared. Kazakhstan was so unprepared that it took us 2 years to develop our own currency, because we had no specialist in finance in the country who could build a national currency system. So it was a very quick learning in terms of figuring out how in the world do you live in a new country that has no currency, that has no police, that has no ministries, that has nothing. And that's where a lot of this passion started from, because I think it's closer than we think. Disruption is closer than we think, and it's much more easy to disrupt things now than it was some decades ago.
Yeah, I mean that's an incredible story. And in your opinion, has growing up in all of that given you a different perspective on life that you think helps you as an entrepreneur in today's day and age?
Yeah, I mean, I had the best childhood. I have no sadness of any kind about my childhood. In front of me, nobody was killed or murdered. That happened for my parents and, of course, for my grandparents. So I had a lovely childhood. And then the transitions in the country for me was a sense of freedom. And I think that's what I learned the most about reinvention, because change is not a punishment. It's not a wrath of gods or any kind of way to get us. It is an opportunity to let go of things that no longer serve us. It's an ultimate freedom. So what I learned in the 90s is that we have the ultimate freedom to choose a new version of our country. We have the ultimate freedom to choose a new version of our company, of our team, of our product. And this is the most liberating experience we can give ourselves if we change the way we think about change.
Yeah. And at what point in your life did you get introduced to business, start business? What did that look like?
I started working in the insurance business in 1993 as a salesman. I was horrific at that, really bad. But I was good at telling stories, so I was moved to marketing and PR. And from there, I ended up going to United States and completing my PhD here in early 2000s. And I went to live my normal corporate career. Oh, sorry, academic career. So I was a professor. I was very fortunate to get support for my research. I grew to become a Coca-Cola chaired professor of sustainability, which is a very fancy way to say that you've done a lot of research and you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And in 2007, one of my executive education students, a president of a company, said, "You say things that are so interesting, I almost believe you. The problem is you've never worked in business. You have no clue what you're talking about. So you should go work in business and then you will be much better as an educator." So we started our Reinvention Agency in 2007 and then built the Reinvention Academy in 2015.
Okay. And then where did you go from there? What happened after that?
2007, intense amount of on-site reinvention projects. So massive mining company. We spent years reinventing this company, really rethinking everything they do from process to products and also taking it off the market. It was a publicly traded company, and one of our efforts was to make it back private.
I heard that's really difficult to do.
Oh, much harder than going public. What I learned, and much more expensive.
Yeah.
They really make you pay to exit the market. If you think it's expensive to go through IPO, try exiting the market. It's really hard and very expensive. But it worked because the market right now, in particular, the stock market is so short-sighted. Everything is about quarterly performance. So if you want to think big or if you want to do something new, you will be crushed by the market because everyone wants to see short-term performance and not think about long-term. But so we've done massive amount of projects, very large number of companies, had the luxury of working with many good, amazing companies reinventing ahead of the curve, which is always what we want to see. 2014, we got to the point we couldn't accept any more clients. And that's how education came. And that's how we went into online courses. Gotcha. Because our clients were asking, what can you give us? If you cannot come in here with a team, can you train us? Can you give us a methodology? Can you explain what you do? It started super slow. It started with like a hobby on the weekend, and the team was kind of, do we want to write it down? This is so boring. But then this year we accelerated because COVID-19 allowed us to be at home and write down the tools and explain the cases and test them a little bit better. So this year we definitely took our education part of our business to the next level.
Gotcha. I love that. And you said you're a recovering academic. What does that mean?
It means that you are addicted to things like teaching or research, right? So research is boring, meticulous, slow thing, but then you discover something and you really can make a huge difference for people. So it took us quite a while to figure out how can we measure the speed of change. But now that we can give you data, let's say 18 versus 20, and show that this is not a temporary situation, that the speed of change is a totally new world that requires you to have different approach to budgeting, different approach to hiring, different approach to product management. This is a new ball game. That is super exciting to me. So it means that I continue to do research. Mm-hmm. I continue to write a little bit boring articles in places like Harvard Business Review, and I continue to teach in more academic settings. So not only online courses, but some of those more classic ways like master's degrees and professional degrees and so on.
Gotcha. Do you think being an academic has been a hindrance to being an entrepreneur, has enhanced it, helped it, or neither?
I don't think it's a matter of a degree or no degree. It's a matter of a person or what kind of person. So I was a bad academic according to my business schools because the business schools measure you not even by your teaching score. They measure you by the number of technical academic publications. So I've met a lot of people who know how to write scientific papers and have zero work experience, which for me was unacceptable. So I was this big rebel and had a lot of difficult discussions at academic council meetings and so on. Yeah. But what I treasure from academia is a ability to ask questions. I can ask questions so quickly that help me figure out what in the heck is going on, that it truly boggles me to this day why we don't teach kids this in elementary school.
Yeah.
What you are taught to do to figure out your research question, the process of structuring whole bunch of assumptions into a question. I think, I don't know, I don't remember who said it, but I want to say it was Einstein who said that, but one of the great people said that if you don't have an answer, it probably means that you don't yet have the right question. And he spoke about the fact that he discovered the theory of relativity when he knew that his real question was, how does the universe looks like if I'm sitting on top of a ray of light? So once he understood the question, so what would the universe look like if I'm sitting on a ray of light? That was the process of scientific discovery. Same in business. If you truly understand the question, you will almost immediately see the answer. And that was the greatest gift that academia gave me so far.
I love that.
Right?
And that's a huge gift, especially as an entrepreneur. Is just, if you can't find the answer, maybe you're asking the wrong question. And I mean,
research, not so much.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. Like, that's one of the things that I don't understand why they don't teach that in school. Like, I don't understand why they don't teach more critical thinking, questioning things. In fact, it almost seems like kids sometimes get shut down when they ask too many questions. And even from parents, like I do it to my son, not like intentionally, but I'm just like, he'll ask question after question after question after question. You're just like, all right, it's enough. But it's actually a really good thing that they question that. And I think a lot of people stop growing because they just learn that they should stop asking questions. And, then you go into school and you have a curriculum, and then you just have to ask questions within there. And so I never, like, I asked the question because I was obviously curious about it, but that was an answer I was not expecting. And I totally see the value in that. Like, that's a great trait to have as an entrepreneur, is just asking the right questions to get the answers that you need.
I think for our kids, it's not our fault or their fault. It was a time. It was the sign of time. So again, coming back to life cycles of our companies and life cycles of our business models, the average life cycle of a company in 1950s and most of 20th century was 75 years. So from the beginning of your company to bankruptcy or acquisition and merger, it was on average 75 years. Wow. And remember, you need to reinvent halfway through the cycle, right? Before you reach the declining stage, halfway through the cycle is still 37 and a half years.
Yeah.
That meant I could graduate from college or from high school, enter your company, work in your company my entire life, retire from your company, and never see one change.
Oh my gosh.
I would do the exact same thing. That's where our proverbs come from, right? Don't rock the boat. Don't fix it if it ain't broken, and stuff like that. All of those things come from the era of long cycles, and the answers, the obsession our education system has with the right answer comes from that era, because when nothing changes for 40 years, you need to learn one right answer and just keep doing it. That, right? Now, the average cycle is 6, which means you need to reinvent on average every 3 years. The cycles are shrinking, and the skill required from us, from our kids, from our team members are completely different. Now is the time to ask tough questions, and now is the time where answers from the past can kill you in a minute. So this is the time to rethink the tools, the skills, and of course, to change your mindset.
Yeah. I love that. It reminds me, I was talking to my wife not too long ago, and we were talking about everything that's happening right now. And she said something like, it's just never going to be the same again, almost as if it was like a bad thing. But I started to realize that that's always true. Like, even if the pandemic didn't happen, life a month ago isn't going to be the same as it is now, because we see so much change. It's just accelerating. The change is all that happened. So, I mean, look at your life 5 years ago compared to today before the pandemic. It wasn't ever the same. Like, the change is always happening. But I think what you said is something I never realized before, is like, back in the day, change just didn't happen. It didn't. Mm-hmm. So it just seemed like it was always consistent, the same. And people nowadays, when they see accelerated growth, like, it's never going to be the same. It's like, yeah, but that's been the story of our lives for the last 10, 15 years. It's never going to be the same. It's change, because change just keeps on happening. And if I hear you correctly, one of the best things we can do is just change the way in which we see the world, the way we we experience that change. It could be a good thing or a bad thing. And if you have the wrong lens or perspective on it, it could really send your company either down or up, correct?
Absolutely. If you think about the history of humankind, we've seen massive amount of change for most of history, and we've been always adaptive to change. So when the baby is born, I know you have kids. I have a
Mm-hmm.
16, and when she was born, it's not like I needed to give her a bonus to start walking.
Right.
You are normal, you are healthy, and you've changed. This is what you like to do. You are native reinventor. You are born with it as your birthright, and then you get educated out of it. But that's a very recent invention. This is really the time of industrial age, when the predictable processes conveyor method came about, when things stabilized politically, which is in the West happened after the Second World War. This is the time modern management was born. The original books on modern management all date from 1946 and on. This is most of what we think about strategy, marketing, innovation, supply chain management, and any other field in business you take, finance. All of this comes from this short lived era of stability. Things like debt to equity ratio. How much debt should you have? Remember in the 90s, even in 2000s, it was always borrow, borrow. This is a good thing.
Right.
Risk your bank's money. Don't risk your own money. Great idea in a stable world. Excellent idea. But in a turbulent world, you are putting yourself in danger, and your relationship to cash, the principles of managing your finance, the principles of managing your supply chain. Just a couple of decades ago, it was all about just in time supply chain. Don't hold the inventory, do everything just in time. It delivers exactly when you need it. Great idea for stable time. Right now, everyone, including Amazon, are having problems with their deliveries because we are living in a disruptive time and it's not predictable. So you cannot have a reliance on trusting that somebody will ship things to you on time. No, you need to think differently about inventory. So this is not just a sidekick conversation. The fundamental assumptions about what it means to be in business, what it means to stay competitive, what even the nature of competitive advantage is changing.
Yeah. And one of the things that it's happening right now in our space too is with the pandemic. Well, let me give a little more context what I'm about to say. So you were talking about how certain times it seems like there were certain things that were good to do and not to good, and we got to be careful of that advice. And I think for the space that we're in with like the courses and packaging up our knowledge and selling it, one of the things that has happened during the pandemic is that it brought a huge awareness to the online world and online education that didn't exist before. And on the surface level, most people look at that and go, great, I have way more customers potentially coming. And where I think most people might be falling short is realizing, yeah, but you also have a heck of a lot more competitors coming as well. And
Yes.
I think right now would be a perfect opportunity for a lot of course creators, service providers, program creators to really look at what you're teaching about the reinvention, because if you're not recognizing that trend right now, it's just a matter of time. It's a year or 2 years where if you think the competition is intense now, wait a year, wait 2 years, because that whole flood is coming. So with that being said, how can people learn more about what you do? Where can they follow you? Where can they do all that stuff? And I have a couple more questions, but I at least want to give you an opportunity to share where people can learn more, because if you are a course creator, you're a program provider, you're a service provider, you better bet in the next year or two, the competition is going to go up at least double, maybe even triple, because of the awareness from the pandemic. So where can people learn more about what you do?
I appreciate that question. So we have a new book out called the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos. And it's very pragmatic. So it's 9 tools. It's all in color. It's worksheets inside for you and your team.
And I have it
And
right here. So if you're
I
watching the video, here it is.
have Yes. So we put together 85-page free preview that includes 2 tools and 1 case study with the worksheets that you can download completely free at learntoreinvent.com/handbook. And we will, of course, will give you a link so it's easier to find around the wherever you are listening or watching this episode. But learntoreinvent.com, and from there you can either /handbook, or it's right there on the first page of our academy. The amazing thing is the community. So you always become part of a community. We have about 3,000 people who are active right now, who are testing the tools, who are giving you kind of feedback, what to do with the Titanic syndrome test, or what to do with stellar strategy model, and really play around. So the best place to find it is learntoreinvent.com.
Cool. And then do you guys have any Instagram or social handles so people can follow as well?
Chief Reinvention Officer, I'm kind of confused what to do with social. I really need to reset social media presence. So I think we will still be there by the time you're listening to this episode, but we're really questioning some assumptions right there. But if you just Google Chief Reinvention Officer, which is the term we came up with in 2015, you will automatically find something about me. Chief Reinvention Officer is our mission, is build everyone's capacity to reinvent, to become chief reinvention officers in our own life. So once you Google chief reinvention officer, you will find me somehow, one way or another.
Gotcha. Actually, I have one last question. We're going to go into a rapid fire round where it's just going to be like quick 1-2 answers here in a second. But one question just popped into my head is, whose responsibility is it to be that chief reinvention officer inside of a company? Is it the owner, the CEO? Does it matter the size of the company? Like, whose responsibility is it to kind of take that on?
I love that question. So historically, it was assumed that the CEO will do the reinvention. And unfortunately, the amount of firefighting required from many CEOs right now means that they're not really doing a good job. So in big companies, we see actual jobs showing up called Chief Reinvention Officer, and at least one state in the United States, in Dakotas, one of the South and North Dakotas, has now a state level Chief Reinvention Officer at the government level. So this is showing up as a job title. But I also see entrepreneurs giving up the operational role to somebody who is a COO or an integrator, and actually taking on more of a role of chief reinvention officer. One of my students, Gary Graham in South Africa, he owns a quite large consulting business. He was the CEO. And on the second week of the course, he quit as a CEO, put a younger person as a operational CEO, and became the president and chief reinvention officer to be the one who is looking ahead, while this technical CEO or operational manager actually runs the existing business model. So you as an entrepreneur are building the new business model, while somebody else is running the existing business model that is more or less figured out.
Love that. And that makes a lot of sense, because it's kind of like that visionary integrator type role. It's like that visionary is that chief and reinvention officer. I love that. Okay, you ready for some rapid fire questions here?
Yeah. I hope I don't blunder or don't say something I don't need.
You might, but it's okay. But I hope not. They're pretty easy questions. But the thing is, try to keep them under 1 sentence or less. And for everyone listening, I have not prepared her at all for any of these questions. So here we go. Okay. Do you believe that entrepreneurship should be taught in schools?
Yes.
What's going to happen? What do you see the next 5 years looking like for you?
Extremely intense, and saying no to more than 90% of your asks.
Oh, I love that. If you lost everything today, who would be the first person that you would call?
My husband, my daughter, and then my parents.
And what's the most defining moment you've experienced so far in your business?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, every time you see a result for your students, right now we are more in the educational space, you see some massive result, people really breaking through, and you're like, oh my God, this is not for nothing. All of this confusion and mess that is normal part of being a business owner, it's not for nothing. But yeah.
When you have those students, those moments are just so precious. It's what we live for. So I get that.
But I also loved every time we lost money, because that was the most honest experience of our life. You kind of really know who you are, who your partners are in the moment you lost money. So from the point of view of learning, I love those two. I don't want to have many of them, but
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I know you
I remember
mentioned,
your
I know
story. Yeah.
you mentioned you had 500,000 stolen from you. I was at one point 40,000 in debt. So that's like, yours was way worse. It sounds it sounds like, but those moments are really where you find what you're made of, like there's so much self-discovery in those moments. So I mean, I love that a lot. Okay. Next question. If you had a friend who speaks to you the same way your inner dialogue speaks to you, how long would you guys be friends?
Um, I am not tough towards myself, but I am I'm a workaholic. So we would be friends because I like to work. That doesn't mean that that's the right thing. I think I need to change some of the internal things. I am extremely kind to myself in terms of like, I don't say anything negative about myself, but I do like to work. And I think that's unsustainable. I think we all need time of quiet. We need reflection. We need silence. We need breathing out as much as we need breathing in, and I'm still learning that.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more. Last question, head or heart?
Oh, hard.
Yeah. I don't think I've had a single guest who said head yet. I think everyone pretty much leads with their heart, at least on this podcast.
Yeah, 100%. But
Yeah.
it's also, I think, the kind of person you are, and us being, I'm your student. So those of you who didn't yet understand, I am not only, I don't also, I'm not only in your course, but I'm also in your mentorship program. So I'm your student, and I think you are the kind of person who, this is what you bring to the world, and finding that place where you can connect head and heart is the most interesting part, and that's why I think you have guests who
Yeah.
answer that way.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And again, I appreciate you coming on to the podcast and sharing your wisdom with all of us. So for all of those listeners out there, I'm telling you, you need to pay attention to what she teaches, because that competition wave, the market that you have right now, if you think there's been disruption and there's been a lot of chaos going on, just wait, because it has unlocked a lot of customers, but a lot of competition as well. And it might be time for you to reinvent. So thank you for being on, and thank you for all of those listeners out there. If you guys have not left us a review on iTunes, head over, leave us a review, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.